The bear came out of the thicket so fast I never got my rifle up. One second I'm pushing through brush along the Grand River, stepping careful, watching the ground the way you do in Ree country, and then she's on me. A sow, 2 cubs somewhere behind her, 300 pounds of her, and she hits me like a wall falling over. I went down hard. What I remember first isn't the pain, it's the smell. Bear musk and the hot copper smell of my own blood opening up and something else. Something green and wild underneath it all, like the earth itself was paying attention. She had me by the back of the neck, and she was shaking me the way a dog shakes a rat, and I heard something in my back make a sound that I felt more than heard. Then she opened me up, claws like skinning knives. I know what that feels like now. I know what it feels like to be the animal on the table. I put my knife in her somewhere. I don't remember doing it. My hands did that on their own. She dropped me eventually. I don't know how long it took. My sense of time was gone. The grass was flat on one side of me and the sky was flat on the other side, and I was lying between them trying to remember how breathing worked. When the men got to me, the first thing I heard was the silence before anyone said a word. That silence told me everything. My name is Hugh Glass. I was born in Pennsylvania, though I barely remember what Pennsylvania looked like. I've been a man of the western rivers and the northern plains for longer than I can properly account for. I've trapped and fought and bled along the Missouri and the Yellowstone and a dozen rivers that don't have names white men have agreed on yet. This is the story of the worst thing that ever happened to me. And the worst thing that ever happened to me is why I'm still alive to tell it. I was not a man who chose solitude. I want to say that clearly. Some men go out into the wild because they're looking for something. Peace, God, silence. I understand those men. I am not one of them. I went where the fur was. I went where the work was. I went where the land was still itself and hadn't been talked into becoming something else yet. But before any of that, before the Missouri, before the trapping, before Ashley's company and the Ree country and everything that came after, I was a young man in Pennsylvania who didn't fit. I can't tell you what it felt like precisely. I've tried over the years talking to other men around fires who seem to understand without me finishing. There's a feeling some men carry, like wearing clothes that belong to someone else. Everything's almost right, almost the right size, but, and you always know that you're wearing a dead man's coat. I tried to live the life that was available to me. I tried for years. I worked. I stood in rooms and said the right things and ate at tables where the food was good and the company was decent, and the whole time some part of me was pressing against the inside of my chest like it wanted out. I'm not saying this to make it sound noble. It wasn't noble. I was difficult to be around. I know that. I was a man who couldn't sit still, couldn't be satisfied, couldn't pretend that what was in front of me was enough when I could feel, like a smell you can't name, that something else existed somewhere. There was a woman once, in St. Louis. I'll tell you about that in a moment, or I'll try. What I'll say first is this. The night I decided to join Ashley's company, I was sitting in a tavern on the river, and a man who'd come back from the upper country was talking. He wasn't telling stories the way men do when they want to impress. He was just talking, quiet, about what the land looked like up there, the cottonwoods along the Platte, the smell of sage after rain, the sky at night so dense with stars it had weight. I sat there and I listened, and something in my chest that had been pressed tight for years opened up like a hand letting go of something it didn't need to hold anymore. I walked out of that tavern and I didn't go back. The woman in St. Louis, her name was Clara. I don't know if she's still alive. I hope she is. I hope she has a good fire and a man who deserves her, and I hope she never thinks about me at all, because if she does think about me, it means I cost her something, and she didn't deserve to pay. I was going to tell her something the night before I left. I stood outside her door for a long time. The street was muddy, spring mud, the kind that smells of everything waking up. I stood there for probably 20 minutes with my hand half raised to knock. I walked away. I've thought about that, Every single year since, every winter when the nights run long and the silence gets particular. I still don't know if I was sparing her or sparing myself. I think probably myself. I packed 2 days before departure so I'd have to think about it as little as possible. The rifle, the powder horn and shot, 2 knives, the small one for skinning, the long one for everything else, the fire steel and flint wrapped in oilcloth, a tin cup, dried meat for the first week, a capote coat rolled tight and strapped. Each thing I packed was an argument. Each thing was me saying, this is what I need. This, not more, not different. This. The morning I left, the sky was gray and the river was high and the mud smelled exactly the same as it had outside Clara's door. I remember noticing that. I remember thinking it was funny, in the way things that aren't funny feel funny when you're scared. I was scared. I want to say that clearly, too. Any man who says he wasn't scared before stepping into the country I was stepping into is either lying or a fool, and I've buried enough liars and fools to know the difference. I walked north until town stopped, until the sounds of it, wheels, voices, dogs, the clink of metal on metal, faded into the distance and then into nothing. I breathed in. I breathed out. I kept walking. I was 40 years old when the bear came for me, already old for that country. I'd been living on the edges and margins of the known world for long enough that I had scar tissue in places most men don't think about. I'd survived the re-attack that June, a bullet in the leg that healed ugly, but held. I'd buried men I respected and eaten things that would ruin the appetite of anyone who hadn't been hungry enough to stop caring. I knew the country. I knew the dangers. I knew Grizzly's sign. I still didn't see her coming. That's the thing about the bear. It isn't a lesson. It isn't proof of something. You can know everything right and still walk into the wrong thicket on the wrong afternoon. The bear doesn't care what you know. The land doesn't grade on effort. You can do everything a careful man does and still end up face down in the grass with your back opened up and your blood running warm into the dirt. I spent a long time thinking the attack meant something. I don't think that anymore. It happened. I was there. She was there. That's the whole explanation. After the men got to me, they carried me. Not far. A few hundred yards to a patch of ground near the river that was flat enough. Someone tore cloth and pressed it against my back. I couldn't feel it the way you'd feel a normal touch. I could feel the pressure, distantly, the way you feel rain on a bad fever. Aware of it, but separate from it. Andrew Henry looked at my wounds for a long time without speaking. Then he said something to the men around him, quiet, and they moved away. I knew what the quiet meant. He asked for volunteers to stay with me until I passed. He was fair about it. He told them what it would mean. Staying in re-country, exposed, waiting for a man to die, then catching up to the main party as fast as they could travel. He said he'd compensate them for the time. 2 men stepped forward, Fitzgerald, and a boy named Bridger. I couldn't speak clearly. The wounds on my throat were bad, and when I tried to make words, the air came out wrong, but I could hear. I heard everything. They stayed 3 days or 4. I was feverish for most of it, and my sense of time was gone, so I can't say exactly. I remember waking to the sound of them talking low, the 2 of them, Fitzgerald's voice and the boy's voice, and I remember the particular kind of quiet that falls between 2 people who are deciding something. I remember Fitzgerald saying, "He's not dead yet, but he's going to be, and we're sitting here in re-country waiting for something that's already decided." I remember the boy not answering for a while. Then I went under again. When I came back up, I was alone. I'm going to tell you what alone sounds like in open prairie. It sounds like wind, just wind, constant low, moving through the grass with a hiss that never fully stops. No voices under it, no footsteps, no fire crackling, no breathing that isn't yours. The silence wasn't peaceful. It wasn't the silence I'd walked toward when I left St. Louis all those years before. This silence was the silence of being left, of being decided about, of two men looking at you and arriving at a conclusion and walking away from it. They took my rifle. They took my knife. They took the fire steel. They left me wrapped in a bear hide, half dead, in country with nothing. I lay still for a long time after I realized they were gone. I don't know if I was collecting myself or just waiting to die the way they'd expected me to. Maybe both. Maybe for a little while, I was agreeable to the idea. The pain was considerable, and the situation was clear, and there's a part of every man, I think, that understands when the arithmetic doesn't add up. Then something else came up through the pain and the fever and the arithmetic. It wasn't the will to live. That sounds too clean, too much like something you'd say after. What it actually was anger. Pure and specific and personal, not at the bear. The bear had done what bears do, at Fitzgerald, at what he'd taken. Not just the rifle, not just the knife, not just the fire steel. He'd taken my right to die on my own terms. He'd made the decision for me. He'd looked at me and said, "This man is gone and I disagree, and I'll be the one who decides." I decided he was wrong. I rolled onto my stomach. I started crawling. The first problem was the leg. My left leg was broken. I didn't know exactly where or how badly, couldn't see it, couldn't fully feel it through the fever, but I knew from the way it moved wrong when I tried to drag it. There's a particular feeling when bone isn't doing what bone is supposed to do. A looseness, a wrongness in the mechanics. I got to a stand of cottonwood near the river on the second day of crawling. That took most of one day and part of another, maybe 200 yards. I don't want to dress that up. 200 yards in 2 days. Hands and elbows and one working leg dragging a ruined body across the dirt. At the cottonwood, I cut a branch with a sharp rock, which took longer than I'm going to describe. I won't describe the leg setting either, except to say that I did it, and that afterwards I lay with my cheek against the ground and felt the dirt on my face and the cold of it, and focused on that cold the way you focus on a distant fire when everything else is dark. The smell of my own wounds by this point was considerable. Rotting meat has a particular sweetness underneath the rot, a cloying, thick sweetness that sits in the back of your throat. When it's your own body producing that smell, there's a quality of strangeness to it that I don't have words for, like smelling something familiar in a room that doesn't make sense. My back, where the claws had gone deepest, was alive with something by day 3. I reached back, couldn't see, felt the movement of things in the wounds, soft and small and many. Maggots. I lay still for a while, thinking about that. Then I realized the infected flesh I could smell was being eaten. The gangrenous tissue, the dead meat, they were cleaning the wound the way nothing else out there could. Without them, the infection would have run up my spine and into my blood and finished what the bear had started. I thanked them. I mean that literally. I spoke to them out loud in a voice that came out as a wet rasp through my torn throat. I said, "Carry on. I want to tell you about the buffalo carcass. On what I think was the 5th or 6th day I found it. Or it found me. Already days dead. The wolves had been at it. I could smell them, that rank musk, before I could smell the carcass. And when I got close enough, I could see the gray shapes of them moving at the edge of visibility, waiting, watching me the way wolves do, with that patient calculation. I was too tired to be afraid of the wolves. I made noise. I threw rocks, badly, from a crawling position. The wolves moved back, not far, just far enough. They were interested, not threatened. They could afford to be patient. They knew what I looked like. They were doing the same arithmetic Fitzgerald had done. I ate what I could reach. The meat was rancid. I gagged. I ate more. The taste was... I've tried to describe it to men who haven't been that hungry, and I can't. What I can say is that when your body has been consuming itself for 6 days, when your muscles are burning off and your face is already hollow and your hands shake without the effort of shaking, what I can say is that rancid meat in that moment had a quality of miracle that no proper meal in my life has come close to matching. I ate until I couldn't anymore. Then I lay next to the carcass and slept. And the wolves watched, and we had an agreement. They were patient enough to wait, and I was stubborn enough that they were going to be waiting a long time. I need to tell you about the night on the 7th day. The fever broke hard around midnight. I know it was midnight because the moon was straight up and the sky was clear and cold and the stars were... I've been out on that prairie for 30 years off and on, and the stars never stop being what they are. Dense, uncompromising, indifferent. They don't care. They were there before any of this, and they'll be there after. On a regular night, that indifference is just the sky. On a night when you're lying alone in open country with a broken leg and a shredded back and no weapons and no fire and 2 months' walk to anywhere that might keep you alive, that indifference has a specific feeling. The sweat soaked through everything. Hot first, then the cold hit it and I started shaking, full body shaking, the kind that isn't voluntary, the kind that's your body doing triage. I pulled the bear hide tighter and jammed my face against the ground and breathed in the smell of the dirt, cold clay and the faint sweetness of dead grass, and underneath it something mineral, something old. I thought about Fitzgerald, not in a complicated way. I just thought, he is alive somewhere right now. He is warm. He told men I was dead. He told them he'd watched me go, and they believed him. And he is somewhere warm and probably sleeping. I am not dead. I am not dead. I kept saying that to myself, not a prayer, not an inspiration, a correction, an argument with the arithmetic. I am not dead. I watched the moon move across the sky. I matched my breathing to the grass moving in the wind. At some point before first light, I slept. When I woke up, I started crawling again. Here's what a man's body can do. It can move when it has no business moving. It can find energy in places you would not believe anything useful could live. It can turn rage into locomotive force and run on that for days when everything reasonable says the engine should be empty. Here's what it costs. By the time I reached the Missouri, which I think was about 3 weeks into the crawl, though my time was still unreliable, I had lost what I'll estimate at 40 pounds of weight I couldn't afford to lose. My leg had set badly but was bearing partial weight. The wounds on my back were healing in a way I would not describe as clean, but were not actively trying to kill me. My hands had worn to raw meat on the palms from the ground. 3 fingers on my left hand didn't grip right from a point in the crawl when I put my full weight on a rock that turned. Some small thing in the hand gave way. I kept moving. The hearing in my right ear was already going from a rifle fired too close the year before. That doesn't count, but I'll note it. The throat healed over in a way that made my voice permanently different. Lower, rougher. Men who'd known me before the attack said I sounded like someone had reached in and changed something. Maybe they had. I reached friendly Sioux, Lakota, somewhere along the Missouri. I don't know how they found me or why they helped me. I was a white man crawling through their territory, half dead and filthy and stinking of old blood and rotten meat. They looked at my wounds. They looked at each other. They gave me food. One old man cleaned my back with something that burned like fire and smelled like green wood. I didn't say a word during that. I held onto a piece of root they gave me to bite, and I didn't say a word. He looked at my face when he was done. He said something in Lakota that I didn't understand, but understood. Something like, "You're a stubborn man," or maybe, "You're a foolish man." Maybe both. Maybe there's no difference between those two things. I got to Fort Kiowa in October. I know what I looked like because I could see it in the men's faces. They'd heard I was dead. They stood in the doorway of the fort and looked at what had walked in from the prairie, and not a man said anything for a long moment. Then someone said, "Glass?" I said, "I need a meal." I didn't stay long at Fort Kiowa. I want to be honest about why. The food was good. The shelter was warm. I slept in an actual bed for the first time in 2 months, and I remember staring at the ceiling of that room and waiting to feel something about it. Relief, gratitude, the pleasure of safety. And what I mostly felt was impatience. Fitzgerald was somewhere. Bridger was somewhere. They thought I was dead. I joined a party heading upriver in November. We were 8 men. 7 days out, the Ree found us. I won't describe that in detail. I'll say that the men on either side of me died before I knew what was happening, and that I spent 2 days moving through brush along the river, getting distance between myself and where it had happened, and that when I was clear, I sat against a cottonwood tree and looked at my hands for a long time. I kept moving, alone again. By now, being alone in that country felt not comfortable exactly, familiar, the way an old wound is familiar. You know the shape of it. You know what it can and can't do. I made Fort Henry in late November or December. The cold had come in hard by then. The Yellowstone country has a particular quality in deep cold. The air gets a clarity to it, a crispness that makes distances look different, makes everything look closer and sharper and more real than it should. I walked into that fort with my made-over knife and my staff and my face that I imagine looked like something assembled from parts. I asked for Bridger first. He was 18 years old. I want to say that. 18. He came to stand in front of me and he looked at my face and he looked at my hands and something happened in his eyes. I've tried to name what it was. Not quite fear. Something more complicated. Something that knew what it had done. I stood there for a long time looking at this boy. He said, "I thought you were dead." We both thought you were dead. I said, "I wasn't." I said some other things. I won't repeat them. They were not gentle things, and I don't regret saying them. But at the end of it, I looked at this boy, 18 years old, wide-eyed, the rest of his life still in front of him. And I thought about what I could take from him and what it would cost me to take it. I said, "Don't ever leave a man again. Don't do that again." He said, "I won't." I believe he kept that promise. I've heard his name since. Jim Bridger became something of a legend in his own right, a man who knows the country the way very few men know anything. I believe he kept it. I traveled to Fort Atkinson in the spring. Fitzgerald was there. He joined the army. I stood outside that fort for a while. I'm not going to pretend there wasn't a calculation happening. He was a soldier. I killed a soldier. I'd hang. Simple as that. The army would see to it, no matter the provocation. I walked in. I found him. He was older than I remembered. They always are. People you've been carrying in your head. They're frozen at the moment you last saw them, and when you find them again, they've kept living without your permission. He looked at me the way the men at Fort Kiowa had looked at me, like he was looking at something that didn't make sense. I got my rifle back. I looked at him for a long time. I said, "If you ever leave that uniform, I will find you." Then I left. That night I camped outside the fort, and I sat next to my fire, the one I built with my own hands from my own steel, the fire that was mine. And I waited to feel what I'd thought I would feel when it was done. The fire burned down. I went to sleep. That was it. That was all of it. The thing I'd crawled 200 miles for, the thing that had pulled me out of the grass and through the fever and past the wolves and through another re-attack and through deep winter in the Yellowstone country. It burned down the same as the fire and I went to sleep. I don't say that as a lesson. I say it as the truth. Make of it whatever you want. I went back north. People who hear the story expect something different at this point. Some explanation, some decision. They want me to say I chose the wilderness over civilization. I chose freedom over comfort. I chose something, and I understand why. The story seems to demand it. The truth is simpler and less dramatic. I went back because I was a trapper and the fur was north. I went back because I knew that country and it knew me. I went back because when I'd been lying in the grass with my back open and my leg broken and my throat leaking, the thing that had been wrong for so many years, the too small coat feeling, the pressing against the inside of my chest, that feeling was gone. Not because I was suffering, but because I was exactly where I was, exactly in the thing happening. There was no room in that crawl for anything to be other than what it was. That clarity I tried after to find it in other places, in the rooms of forts, at tables, in conversations with men who smelled of civilization. I couldn't find it there. It wasn't in those places. It was out here, in the work, in the cold, and the necessity, and the absolute reality of what a day asks of you when there's nobody else to answer for it. A man came through in my 8th year back. He was heading south. He was clean, cleaner than the country usually allowed for, and he had the look of a man delivering something. He camped with me for 2 nights near the Powder River, and on the second morning he said that he knew men in St. Louis who were looking for experienced trappers, good money, proper housing, work that didn't try to kill you every other week. I poured coffee. I listened. He waited. I handed him his cup. He looked at me for a while, and then he looked at the country around us, the cottonwood along the river, the high plains stretching east, the mountains cutting the western sky. And he said something like, "I suppose I understand." He left after breakfast. I watched him until I couldn't see him. Then I went back to work. There's a difference between being alone and being lonely. I learned this slowly, over years. The way you learn things that don't announce themselves as lessons. Lonely is the feeling I had in St. Louis, in rooms, at tables, with people all around me and not one of them seeing me clearly, not because they were bad people, but because I was wearing the wrong shape, and they kept responding to the shape and not the man. Alone on the Powder River in October, with the aspens gone yellow, and the elk moving through the trees with that silence big animals have that doesn't make sense for their size. Alone like that isn't lonely at all. It's something else. I don't have a word for it. Something like being exactly the right size. Something like the coat fitting. I've tried to explain this to men who haven't felt it and watched their eyes. I can tell the ones who understand. They get a look, not quite wistful, more like recognition, like I've said a word in a language they thought only they knew. I don't tell those men what to do with that feeling. It's not my business. Year 11, winter. I was running the trap line on a tributary of the Yellowstone, a stream I won't name because I'm selfish about that water. Cold had come in fast that year, and I'd got caught out farther than was wise. 3 miles back to camp, dropping temperature, the sky going the color that means serious weather before morning. I was moving fast, head down, making good time. Somewhere around the 2nd mile, my right knee, the one that had been unreliable in deep cold since year 7, since a fall I don't want to describe. My right knee simply stopped working in the way a door stops working when the hinge gives. Not gradually, just no longer functional. I went down in the snow. I lay there for a moment. The cold was working up through my clothes the way cold does when you stop moving. Fast, businesslike, not angry, just methodical. The sky was going dark and going the wrong color, and I had 3 miles of bad knee between me and warmth. I got up. I made camp that night a mile short of where I needed to be. Found a stand of spruce, dense enough to cut the wind, got a fire going with hands I had to watch because the feeling had left them enough that they were working by instruction rather than sensation. I sat next to the fire and I looked at my hands in the firelight. They were a record, every year visible in them. The scar from year 2 where the ice cut through my glove, the fingers on the left that didn't fully close, the knuckles that had healed over wrong and smooth after I'd tried to argue with a rock. I wasn't upset about them. That's what I want to say. I looked at them and I wasn't upset. They were the hands of a man who'd been doing the work, all the work for all the years. There was something in that I didn't need to explain to myself. The fire burned through and the storm came and I weathered it in that spruce stand. And in the morning, the knee had loosened up enough to work and I walked back to camp. By the time I was in my late 40s, the big tasks had become the kind that required planning. Splitting wood, which I'd done at pace without thinking for 20 years, I now did in sections, rest in between. Not because I was unwilling, but because the body gives you information and the smart thing is to listen to it. An hour of splitting in the morning, an hour in the afternoon. The pile grew the same as it always had, just differently arranged in time. There was a morning in my last few years when the cottonwoods along the river had done something particular. I couldn't tell you what season exactly. The shoulder between autumn and winter, the light coming low and gold. The cottonwood leaves already mostly gone, but a few still holding, each one backlit so you could see the structure of it, the veins, the whole complicated interior. I stood there for a long time. I wasn't thinking anything specific. I wasn't arriving at conclusions. The light was doing what it was doing, and I was watching it. And that was the whole of the moment. This is what I've found. The country gives you these moments and it doesn't announce them. It doesn't mark them as important. They arrive between tasks on the way somewhere in the middle of nothing in particular. A quality of light in cottonwood leaves, the way the river sounds at 3 a.m. when the rest of the world is quiet. The particular cold smell of coming snow. These moments aren't the reward. They're not the point, but they're present in a way that I cannot explain in other terms. More present than anything I found in rooms with walls and roofs, and the good, comfortable weight of civilization pressing down on everything. I stood under those cottonwoods for a long time. Then I went back to work the last winter. I was on the Yellowstone with 2 men, Edward Rose, who I'd trapped with before, who was the kind of man you trusted because he'd been tested and the testing had come out right, and a younger man named Menard. The ice was thick. We were moving. It was an ordinary day in the way that ordinary days fill up the years. Cold, clear, the ice making small sounds underfoot, the work present and immediate. I don't know what I was thinking. I know what the ice looks like just before. There's a quality of sound. The ice talks to you if you know how to listen. I've known that for 30 years. I don't know if I was listening. There are things I'd say to the man I was, not to the young man in Pennsylvania, the one wearing the wrong coat. He needed to figure his own way out. I wouldn't short-circuit that for him even if I could. To the man at the start of the crawl. That one. I'd say the anger is the fuel. Don't be ashamed of it. Don't try to turn it into something more elegant. Fitzgerald did what he did, and your anger about that is right. And it's going to carry you farther than love would, farther than hope, farther than any philosophy you could lay on top of it. Let it be what it is. Use it. I'd say the maggots are going to feel wrong. Let them work. I'd say when you get there, when you find him, it's not going to be what you thought. The thing you've been crawling toward is going to look, when you're standing in front of it, like a smaller thing than it was from a distance. That's not a tragedy. That's just how the arithmetic resolves. What you'll have instead is you got there. You got there on your own body and your own refusal and across 200 miles of country that was trying to finish what the bear started. Nobody can take that back. Fitzgerald can't take it back. The years can't. Whatever comes next, that's done and it's yours. I'd say go back north after. Don't wait. The country is where you belong and you know it by now. You've known it since before you could name it. I'd say the knee goes in year 7. Mind the cold. There's a bear hide somewhere. It's not the same one. That one rotted out in the first year. But there's always been a bear hide somewhere, a wall, a floor. I keep them. Men have asked me why. I've thought about it. The best answer I have is this. That hide was my burial shroud. 2 men wrapped me in it and decided I was done. I've been carrying it ever since, not as a souvenir, not as a trophy, but as an argument. As the ongoing answer to the question they thought they'd settled. The cabin walls smell of pitch. 30 years of fire and pine pitch and the particular smell of a man living in a place until the place has absorbed him. Every cut I made to build it, every winter, every repair. It smells like work that stayed. The pine pitch outside smells different. When it's fresh, when you cut into a pine and the pitch comes up red and raw, it smells like blood. Every time. I noticed that in year 1, and I've never stopped noticing it. That's not a comparison I'm making for effect. It's just what the smell does to the part of me that knows what both things are. This river is the same river. All the rivers have been the same river. The Missouri, the Yellowstone, the Powder, the Grand where the bear came for me. Different water in the same channels, always moving, never the same and always the same. I understand why some people find that sad. I find it exactly right. That's what alive looks like. That's what real things do. I crawled out of a thicket in South Dakota and I'm still here. Not as a lesson, not as a proof of anything, as a fact. Some of you are feeling something right now that you don't have a name for. I've seen it in men around fires, in the way they go quiet at a certain point in the telling. That feeling is yours. It was always yours. I didn't put it there. I'm Hugh Glass. I was not ready to be done.